Hello, Dollar Auction Show listeners. It's Alex and Shimon. It's been a while. Hey, Shimon.
Hey Alex, how are you doing this muggy Friday afternoon?
I'm doing great. Listen, I'm sitting outside. We're going to have a fantastic pod. I want to show you something. I got these little mini Monte Cristos, which I'm going to open up, you know, take one out, pass it around. And maybe I'll have a cigar while we talk. Do you mind if I smoke my little cigarillo? I think
No,
today's
not at
a,
all. Fun fact, the name of the brand in English would be Mountain of Christ.
I got a torch. I got my Christ. Let's go. Let's go. We got a lot to talk about. I want to talk about Biden's tax cuts,
hmm
okay, proposal, the insanity that's happening on campus with the elections, and of course, we'll touch upon crypto and Bitcoin. And you were just at the MicroStrategy conference, so I'd love to hear about how that went.
Yes, and I wish that the first topic was the topic, but unfortunately it's not Biden's tax cuts, it's Biden tax hikes.
Tax hikes. Sorry, that's right. Tax hikes. So let's get into that. We're cutting revenue. So he proposed, for everyone that doesn't know, Biden last week proposed two tax changes. One is 44% taxes on capital gains. Okay, so up from 20 or 22, whatever it is now, up to 44. And the other, which is just an egregious proposal, and we'll talk about the game theory of all of this, is 25% tax on unrealized gains. So I know how I feel about it. Now that we said the context, Shimon, how do you feel about it?
So I will tell you how I feel about it by showing you a song by a Norwegian guy. You weren't expecting that, were you?
I was not. Show me a song.
So this is what this Norwegian guy had to say when the Norwegian government did the same thing. Check this out.
Come to Norway, we will tax you till you're poor. And when you have nothing left, we'll tax you a little more. Before you make a grave mistake, you need to be aware. We even tax paper valuations, so you will have to sell your shares. Don't come to Norway. Don't come to Norway. Don't come to Norway. Don't come to Norway. You will regret it, guaranteed. There's now a 40% exit tax to make sure you never leave. Consider this a warning. Our politicians are insane. They're coming for entrepreneurs. So do not board that plane. Don't come to Norway.
So this is exactly how I feel about Biden's proposal. Now, one thing I want our listeners to understand, there's a really disingenuous talking point that says, oh, this only affects you if you're a billionaire. So, Alex, would you care to refute that point, please?
I would care to refute that, but can I just, before the point, let's just explain what this means.
Yes.
This means that 44% tax on capital gains means you've invested your money in a startup and stocks and equity and real estate in many ways. It has grown. And what we have is long-term capital gains. Short-term capital gains are taxed at your income rate, which is less than a year. Capital gains on investments you've held for less than a year. And investments you've held for longer than a year, they're taxed at 20%. Why is that the case? Let's actually establish why, right? Before we go into the egregiousness of what Biden's doing. When you're investing money, we want money to be invested for many reasons. From a personal perspective, we talk on the show a lot about monetary debasement, and we'll get to this later on in this show too. But the more the government prints money, the more the capital assets, stocks, homes, real estate, Bitcoin, and so on, become harder and harder to acquire. And so if you want to maintain, there's money and there's purchasing power. Consumable goods, shovels, TVs, electronics are going to still be affordable for people. Why? Because there's technological deflation. Technology becomes easier and easier to create. And so they'll still be affordable. But capital goods aren't. So our tax code is structured in a way to get you to incentivize you to invest in capital goods. For a personal perspective, you maintain by investing in capital goods your purchasing power. So capital goods, roughly, the S&P grows at the same amount as the monetary debasement, as monetary print. From a startup and a company perspective, it's like, why do you go to a surgeon instead of a regular doctor to perform a surgery for you? Because they're specialized. And you can make the same argument that capital allocators, funds and companies, are better allocators than individuals. They can find different projects, they have economies of scale, they have pricing power, etc., etc. So you want to incentivize money going towards companies, towards professional capital allocators, for them to allocate capital. From an entrepreneurship perspective, and this is what I think you're getting to, is let's say you create a startup and you've been working hard, or you invest in a startup. It's not liquid. You can't exit the startup. You can't sell your shares in the open market. They're private company shares. Typically, you have to hold on to them for 5, 6 years until you get any return. So you're taking on considerable risk as an investor and as an entrepreneur, because you're typically working for sweat equity, sleeping on the couch, all these famous garage stories about people, creating startups in the garage. And so if it's a capital gain for you, and we want to incentivize entrepreneurship. We want to incentivize people putting in their money, taking it out 6 or 7 years later at a considerable personal risk, because it's locked up for 6 or 7 years. And by the way, most startups go bust. So a lot of times you're not going to see this money. But at the end, when you invest 10,000 and that 10,000 becomes 10 million, right, on one of the startups that hits, you want to be taxed at your income. You want to be taxed lower, because you've taken a considerable risk than someone that's, than your 9-to-5 job. Let me pause. Shimon, am I missing anything before we go into why these taxes are so bad?
Well, I mean, no, that's the perfect thing, but I think you summarized it really well from a high level perspective. I want to make it really concrete for people. So let's say I started now investing in startups, right? I'm an angel investor and I write $25,000 checks to startups. And I have 2 startups that are asking me for money. Both startups are exactly the same business model, exactly the same caliber of team. One of them is in San Francisco, one of them is in Singapore. So with that 40% tax that the US imposes, it becomes a no-brainer for me to give the money to the startup in Singapore. So I just want to make it very, very concrete for people and not like talk about like these theories. Or let's say I'm an employee, right, that wants to join a startup, right? Let's say I'm an American citizen. I get 2 job offers, right? Same salary. One from a startup in San Francisco, one from a startup in Singapore, right? If I have a 40% unrealized tax, and again, with employees, it's a little bit more tricky because like it does kick in above a certain amount, but I'm just saying that the investors, it's really important. It's bad for the employees, and it's also bad for the entrepreneurs. To your point, like if I have a brilliant idea and I can start it in San Francisco or in Singapore, then now it becomes a no-brainer to start in Singapore. And we're seeing this in crypto because of different regulations, but this is just like the nail that will, the final nail in the coffin of the vibrant ecosystem. Like the US used to be like in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the US used to be the Singapore, right? Like Singapore didn't exist. And it's like, if you were a dynamic European guy that wanted to start a company, you would come to the US to start that company. And this proposal is just going to keep eroding this advantage that we have. And the deceptive thing is that many of these things are network effects. So for example, if you have many investors in one place, they probably want to invest in a startup that's kind of close to them, because then it's easier for them to go to board meetings and stuff. So then Silicon Valley, it's easier to get money. Because it's easier to get money, you're more likely to succeed as a startup in Silicon Valley. So then all the employees of the startup become wealthy, and then they become the next round of angel investors. And so this network effect of like capital, that, to your point, like people that know how to allocate capital in startups, is like kind of hard to displace. And that's why it creates this false sense of security. You know how many like graffiti I've seen in San Francisco of like techies go home, we hate you. And there's all this like sentiment against tech. And what they don't understand is that before tech, San Francisco wasn't like an advanced city. It was just like a random sleepy town in the 1950s. And all of the beauty of Silicon Valley came because of entrepreneurship, and they just want to stifle it.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic point to land it. And as Shimon said, we're seeing it very acutely in crypto. And it's like first they come for crypto, they'll come for something else. We see a massive, it's very hard to explain. I almost wish we had stats. We don't have anything prepared for today to pull it up. We're seeing a massive, colossal erosion of talent and startups going abroad. It's in the US, it feels almost like North Korea versus like Dubai and Singapore for crypto. You go there and things are blossoming and the governments are open to it and there's active building and companies are actively saying, no, I will not open an office in the US. And US companies are actively saying, I will start going abroad because the regulation here is so poor. And this is, again, we feel like in crypto, but increasing these taxes will, like you said, it has network effects. It's not just a year one thing. People start moving away and bringing them back. Once you move away, bringing them back is a colossal effort. You have to really drop taxes and bring people back, not to the old levels, but make it much better. So in the long run, not only is it not going to increase revenues to the government because people just will leave, but it will decrease revenues and decrease the revenues in the long run. People won't come back. And so this is just a 44% tax that he's talking about. The 25% tax on unrealized capital gains it is one of the worst policy proposals that I have seen ever. Basically, it says the same entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur. America is built upon entrepreneurs. You start a company, you start a bakery, and you went from nothing to cooking your own thing to now you open up a nice little bakery in the middle of New York, Tribeca. You're doing well. Your bakery went from nothing to being worth $10 million
I
because you
even
sell.
have a great name for it. It's going to be called Tribeca.
I love it, Tribeca. This is so good. So you got Tribeca. It's now worth $10 million, and you're the sole owner. You've been slaving away. Literally, you quit your job. You're making these beautiful, delicious cookies. And now the government's going to say, well, you went from 0 to 10 million. You're the only owner. Owe us 25% tax on unrealized money. Even though you haven't cashed it in, you're worth 10 million on paper. You owe us 25% tax. So what do you have to do as an entrepreneur? You're like, oh God, I don't want to be a criminal. So I need to somehow get out of this $2.5 million to pay for the government in hard cash. I can either take it out of my operations, and if I can't, I need to sell shares. Well, guess what? It's a private market, a liquid market. Who's going to go buy your shares? What if the market's like, I don't want to buy a bakery. You may be worth 10 million, but you need the money now. I'm only willing to pay you at a 5 million valuation. So now you sell 40% of your companies, if not more, to somebody to get the check just to pay the government. Now you've diluted yourself, right, from a business perspective, and you got to do it again in the following year.
Well, I will give an even better example because I love your bakery example, but
Tribeca.
That's even not as bad as it could be because a bakery, you still serve the local market. But again, imagine two startups, right? One is in Tribeca and one is in Singapore, and they both serve the global market. And so one of them now has to sell shares. Like imagine that the shares are liquid. Let's say both companies are so successful that they can immediately find people to buy their shares on the market price, which basically will never happen, to your point. But like even if we give this assumption, the startup in the US will have to decapitalize, will have to like sell shares for cash, right? And then they will have less money to invest in the business. Meanwhile, the startup in Singapore will hire more engineers, will build a better product, and take the market share from the US startup, which means eventually the US government will get less taxes. And I think that's our point. With this thing, the government will get less taxes, not more. But they're doing it, I think, first of all, for a performative reason, in the sense that it pulls well with like young people that don't know how business works, but also like the effects are delayed, and so like you will not be president anymore by the time the effects come.
Yes.
Those people
Super dangerous. Super dangerous. We're going to annihilate the startup community here in DC, and it's I mean, it's just sad. It's just and you're right. This is performative. He's doing it for his base. Obviously, it'll be negotiated out. It's such an egregious proposal. But the fact that this is what the base wants, I think between this and the riots on campus, and we should talk about this as well. In my book, and I've been saying this for a while, there is zero chance that Biden wins the election. And I think not only that, I think Trump wins by a landslide. And again, we can talk about this and why that's the case. But I think the world is waking up to the fact that Biden is not all there. He's definitely more of a puppet. He's old. I mean, Trump is old too. There's only 3 year difference. The risk with Trump is that we don't know if there's going to be a peaceful transfer of power if he's voted out. The risk with Biden is that he'll just completely adhere to this far left, which is pulling him. I would always lean center left, and I would always vote Democrat. I consider myself an independent. I always vote Democrat as center left. My views have maybe moved to the center a little bit, so I'm calling dead center. But according to most people now, I'm like almost a far right Republican in some cases, and it's just crazy to me because I still have very much progressive views on a lot of social issues and so on, but now I'm like some far right, nut job, and it's the spectrum has moved so far left that I think the country's gonna have a reckoning between the economy. That we have high inflation, we have a slowdown of growth of GDP growth, we have a border crisis, which is it's a real deal. Again, you and I have been both on the record of how pro-immigration we are. We are pro-immigration. We are both immigrants. But we're also not pro-open borders. There has to be reasonableness
I'm actually
to everything.
pro-open borders, but what we have is not open borders. What we have is not open borders. If you come from Norway, right, and land in JFK, and you overstay your 3 months or whatever, they're going to be very efficient at deporting you. So we don't have open borders. They specifically want to bring people that will vote for the Democratic Party. And then that's why also they're so upset that they're busting them to Democratic states, because that tactic is most effective if those guys go to red states and flip them. Even if they bust them to blue states, the census, I think, determines how many Congress people you have. So it still helps you marginally, but that's why they're so upset. And you have all these videos of mayors, right? Progressive mayors, like the New York mayor, the Chicago mayor, and they're just saying we don't have the services to support you. It's okay, but then why do you vote for the federal government that makes this program? You know what I mean? It's it's so funny. It's or people who say, people from LA that have their fenced off house with private security, and they're like, yeah, everybody should be let into the country. It's okay, will you let them camp in your backyard? Because they're gonna camp on the street, but you don't spend too much time on the streets. It's just this hypocrisy, right? Of I'm all for these progressive values as long as it doesn't affect me.
There is deep hypocrisy in some of these policies, and a level of being out of touch. I think, reflecting back on the last election, I hate Trump, for the record. I loathe the man. I think he's a terrible human being. But I was never Trump, and I would argue with some parts of my family that voted for Trump last time around.
We argued on the podcast.
Yeah.
I didn't vote for anybody, which, by the way, my wife's family doesn't like me because of it, because they think that not voting for Biden is a betrayal. Forget about voting for Trump, but just not voting for Biden is bad. But we had this debate, I remember, about who will be better for the economy, and I was very adamant. I said Trump will be better for the economy.
You were right, I think, and I said Biden because I said infrastructure go towards SEC. I did not. Biden, when he was running, did not promise that he would do the things he's doing now. I mean, it's so. Again, he's against our way of life in terms of being pro Bitcoin. They're actively against this industry, actively not acting in good faith at all. The regulators are not acting in good faith. It's so. I mean, the charade is up. I mean, it's obvious to folks. In fact, some bills, worse at the digital chamber, we publish videos where the politicians are saying that this bill was written by the banking lobby. Of course, the banking lobby is going to be against Bitcoin and crypto because we believe that the banks are, in many ways, taking people's financial freedom, charging people money for accounts. I've had situations with me where they charge me $500, $50 a month for a service I've never used until all the money was gone in this account. Anyway, it's being written by people who want to financially oppress others, and we don't stand for that. We stand for basic freedom. So I think this election is going to be, I mark it here first, Friday, May 3rd. And not only, on my prediction, not only does Biden lose, I think we will all be shocked at how many minorities, Hispanics, but Black Americans voting for Trump, and how many Jews are going to move off. It doesn't have to be a majority of them, and it just has to be, versus what happened the last cycle. How many Jews are going to leave the Democratic Party, and maybe leave the Democratic Party for a good long time? I want to go on the record and make a prediction. We will be shocked in the exit polls about of course, white men and white conservative men and white men in the South are voting Trump. I think we'll be shocked at women, Hispanics and Blacks and Jews that are voting for Trump or Republicans and not Biden. I think it'll be a reckoning.
Yeah, and speaking of, you raised the universities. So now I'm hearing that the biggest worry that the universities have about these the anti-Semitism so let me just say my position on these protests that are happening. First of all, protests are great. I'm all for protests as long as you can walk through the protest. That's my definition of a protest. If a bunch of people are marching, let's say down the street and shouting and holding banners, if I can walk through them and get to where I need to go, that's a protest, right? If they block a bridge or block an airport or cordon off a part of the university and don't let me go in there, even though it's not their property, that's not a protest. That's I don't know how to call it, but they did it, for example, during the George Floyd things in Seattle. They just blocked off a few blocks in the city and nobody could enter. That's not a protest, right? In San Francisco, they had protests. Great, right? I have nothing against it. And then number two, people said, look, they protested against apartheid in South Africa and they protested against the Vietnam War. But there's a big difference because in both cases, you don't have South Africans that are alumni and students of the universities, and you didn't have soldiers that are fighting the war that are also going to the university, right? So if you were fighting the war, you were not in the university. So this is the first time where they actually did a protest where they basically said, look, what I don't understand is when they say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, either they're ignorant or they're anti-Semitic. And this is why, because if by free they mean that everybody will get a right to vote, from the river to the sea, there's more Arabs than Jews. If all of them get to vote, they will vote for Hamas. And when Hamas goes to power, they will kill all the Jews. So you don't have to be a genius. You don't have to know anything besides the fact that there's more Arabs than Jews from the river to the sea. So that's the end of the argument. People are oh, when they say it will be free, they don't mean kill all the Jews. They just mean let everybody vote. It's okay, but Gaza proves you that it's the same. They voted in 2007 and they were throwing gay people from rooftops. So that's what from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free means. Now, I still think they should be able to say it, right? Freedom of speech. But at least don't block people from moving around. Freedom of movement is also pretty important human right. And then what's really nice is to see the difference between the universities in the north and the universities in the south. In the south, they immediately just call the police. The police clears out the area, no problem. I don't even think people get hurt. They get arrested. I saw a video. They get arrested. They don't even go to jail. They just in the police station, they take their mugshot, they sign something, they go home within a few hours. But they don't get to camp there and just block people from moving. But what I heard is that the universities are getting really worried because most of the money for the university doesn't come from tuition, even though the tuition is so high. most of the money for the university comes from the endowments. And
Yes.
Jewish people are very, very, very big donors, especially to higher education, because we believe in education. It's part of the Jewish DNA. Being educated is a core value. So now the universities are oh, what are we going to do? We're going to have to start cutting staff if Jewish people stop donating. And the only reason that they will stop donating is because they see the difference between the North and the South. So how cool would it be when instead of donating to Columbia University, you donate to Vanderbilt University in Nashville, or University of Texas or whatever, places that they're progressive places, by the way. The University of Vanderbilt, even though it's in Nashville, it's a very progressive place, but at least it's law and order is maintained. So anyway, that's
There
what
are many. There's Tulane in New Orleans, and there's a nickname. It's called Jew Lane because there's so many Jews that go to Tulane. There are many of these universities. I hope so too. There's a statistic. We need to check this, but 10% of Harvard's endowment of their operating account is from tuition, and 50% is from gifts and endowment and donations to the endowment. And a large portion of the endowment donations is from Qatar, from China, from Russia. I mean, these are I think what Americans miss, right? And this is what I constantly see Americans missing about geopolitics is, for us, we're a very impatient society. We care about things happening instantaneously. Versus abroad, people can wait for many years. Russia's plan to infiltrate and enable the left. This is a well-known, publicized plan by the KGB, and Qatar, Arabs all the time are if not this generation, but in a couple of generations, people are very patient, generationally patient. And in the US, it's all about money and instant gratification. These are long games that are set in play and expect to be playing out 30, 40 years from now. So the fact that we have a rot of our higher education system of administrators that are all about we're so focused on this oppressor versus oppressed. And when we label someone an oppressor, God forbid, there's no other point of view. It's just one point of view is correct. That's a problem with the left. The people who are fighting for free speech and equality are actually completely against equality if the view doesn't align with theirs. And it's enabled many of these protesters that are in college campuses are not students. They're paid for protesters. You can see this on many accounts on Twitter. My mom went to the Northwestern protest, and she's like, "They're not students." You can, if our audience, go to a protest and see. Definitely, there are some students that are maybe misguided. Some people believe in free Palestine. Shimon and I both also believe in free Palestine. We don't want Gazans, civilians to die. We would love for a Palestinian for them to have a state that doesn't vote for Hamas and doesn't try to annihilate Israel. From the river to the sea means all the Jews in Israel must die. That's what it means. That's the origin of the statement. It's a Hamas and Islamic Jihad statement. So let's not kid ourselves. From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free equals kill all the Jews in the only place in the world. By the way, Jews make up 0.2%, 0.2% of the global population, and Muslims make up what? I don't know, about 30%. We can look this up quickly.
Yeah.
And Arabs probably make up out of that 30%, half, 20% of the global population, which let's call it 20%. We're 0.2. 0.2 times 10, 2% times 10, 20%. We're talking about 100 times more Arab Muslims, not all Muslims, just Arab Muslims, than there are Jews. And predominantly, it's an Arab problem. And I'll say the other thing that really pisses me off is that there are many people out there, Iranians, for example, that have escaped the Ayatollah and the Iranian oppressive regime. Some of my friends are saying it firsthand. People online on Twitter are talking about this. They're saying the left is literally appropriating. The irony here is deep, that it's privileged white kids in Ivy League institutions, literally the ivory tower, that are appropriating of Iranian people and standing up for the regime, because now the regime, they're lumping in all Iranians together, the regime and the people. The people don't want war with Israel.
Yeah, no, it's not about Israel. It's really about, do you believe that the West is a force for good, or do you believe that the West is a force for bad? And that's kind of how it crystallizes in my mind. Because first of all, I have no problem with Arabs, because like you go to Dubai, it's a very Western place, even though everybody there is an Arab Muslim. I have no problem with Arabs. I have no problem with Muslims. You know, one of my mother's best friends is a doctor called Nader Bhutto, and he's a very, very religious Muslim, and he's a Sufi, and also an amazing physician, right? And he's like an enlightened yogi master. Like, I love, seeing him and speaking to him. It's not about the race, it's not about the religion. It's about a belief system that's a jihadi belief system that basically says the Europeans are the crusaders. I actually did a paper on that in my when I was doing my intelligence course. And like they say, the crusaders, it took us 100 years to kick them out, but we succeeded. And so, and that's their plan, right? So they're like, we're going to kick the crusaders out. And then the question is, do you use violence? And Hamas and all these like jihadi and Iran, they're anti-West, pro-violence, anti-gay. By the way, there's an amazing thing where in Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, he has a speech where he says, if you commit adultery when you're married, you get stoned. If you commit adultery when you're not married, you just get lashes. But if you commit a gay act, whether you're married or not, you have to be killed, because being gay is so bad that all it takes is to try it once, and you can never repent for it, no matter how much you pray to Allah. Now, those are the people that the left is literally chanting pro-Hezbollah, like specifically pro-Hezbollah. They're Palestinians that are not Hamas. I would totally support a chant that says, like, give the Palestinians a state. I would actually join that protest and say, like, give the Palestinians a state. The only question is, who controls the state? And so, like, all these people that think that the West is bad because it's exploiting the poor people from the underdeveloped world and stealing their, like, commodities, of course they support Hamas. So it makes perfect sense to me. Like, it just took me a while to understand that it's like West versus anti-West, and then everything falls into place. Like, all these professors that are joining, they really believe that America is an evil force in the world. And I think America is a great force in the world with all the problems, and we're complaining about the politicians and everything. On net, I think people want to move here. People don't want to move to Iran. They don't have a net positive immigration. So if their system is so great, how do people explain the fact that nobody wants to immigrate there?
I literally couldn't agree with you more. And it's just somehow, I don't know. I don't understand how these college kids don't see it. They're supposed to be, they're supposed to be educated, and they come out and say, like, tear down the U.S. flag, especially the gays or queers or Palestine, whatever the groups are called. They'll go there. They will kill you. They will literally kill you. They don't care that you're for them. They will take you. Or these women, these young girls that are like shown in their little tank tops and short shorts that are bending over and like praying to Allah and doing Muslim prayers. It's like, you wear that in Gaza and you will be lynched, and I hate to say it, and raped. It's like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? And I don't know how to put those two things. Or flying Hezbollah flags, or now they're coming out and saying Hamas aren't a terrorist organization, it's the U.S. is a terrorist organization. Hamas are freedom fighters. Or the crazy part, Black Americans, these young Black Americans are coming out. This one woman was saying, oh, now I get it, it's the Jews. We've been oppressed, and the people who've been oppressing the Blacks are the Jews. And it's like, the Jews marched with Martin Luther King. The Jews were
it's the biggest minority, the biggest non-Black.
By far. We were just reading, there was a rabbi that opened up the conversation before Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. It was a rabbi. BLM, so many Jews came out for BLM. No matter what you think of the BLM protest, Jews were on the front lines of BLM. It's like,
Well, that's the silver lining, I think. That's the silver lining. If the Jews really move to the right, I think that's going to be a great outcome from this thing. Because, like, look, I will unabashedly say I'm not center. I'm like right. My views are right wing because the right wing believes in like let people do whatever they want. Everybody's equal in front of the law, right? Justice and law and order, and then like meritocracy. Those are right wing values. The left wing values is like let's redistribute the resources, take from the people who stole it, and give it to the people who have been stolen from.
Yeah.
And we saw how this leads to hundreds of millions of deaths in the 20th century. And we saw how it actually people are much poorer in
Yeah.
these societies than in free market societies. I mean, just look at Dubai, literally, just look at Dubai versus Syria. Same DNA of people. It's not a race, same IQ. You know that people from Gaza are the most educated Arabs in the world? I just saw this stat in terms of master's degrees, in terms of
Gaza or West Bank?
both Gaza and the West Bank, but Gaza especially. And it's like crazy. It's like they're very, very smart people. And just because they're governed by a bad ideology. And I'm sorry, it's a wrong ideology. It's like if I say every time I cross the road, I don't look left and right, that's a bad ideology. You're gonna get me killed. No, seriously, there are bad ideas. And the left doesn't believe in bad. Everything's relativist. Everything is like, oh, it's in the eyes of the beholder. Well, no, it's not. It's like objectively bad.
It's bad and it's sad and it's I mean just across the board. If there's a silver lining for me, it's that it's opening up our eyes to how far the left has swung. And again, this is why I think it'll be a disaster. Let me show you one more thing.
The last thing I just wanted to say is like all these people protested like against the war in Vietnam, but another way to say it is they protested in favor of the Viet Cong, and all you have to do is like what did the Viet Cong do to the South Vietnamese? And those were the people they supported. It's just like so bad. It's like they always like I don't know. And there was the hilarious tweet like, oh, when has a student protest ever led to something bad? And then there were like 20 examples of literally like the Islamic Revolution in Iraq.
Wait, really? That's
Started
amazing.
with student protests. The like French Revolution. Like there's so many places where it's like it started with protests and it was like very bad, like the outcome. So
That's amazing. That's an amazing tweet. I wish I actually saw that tweet. Well, listen. Let me show you something else. This is and I know we have to wrap up in like 10 minutes. So I want to show you this. This is let me see if I can share my screen here. This is a clip from one of Biden's head economic advisors. Okay, and so I'll just open this up and just watch 1 minute 42 seconds, and I want to hear Shimon's live reaction and the audience for you as well.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to yeah, I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, cause it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
What
So
what do you want me to say? Like,
this is the chair of the Economic Advisory.
oh no, he knows the answer. He just doesn't want to say the answer. Okay, I'll make it very
I don't
simple
think
for.
I don't think he knows the answer. I don't think
No,
he
no,
knows the
he knows
answer.
the answer. I'll tell you. I'll make it very simple for our listeners. The borrowing thing is a little bit complicated. The very simple question is: if the government can print money, why does it collect taxes? Right.
Okay.
That's a much cleaner way of asking it. And it's very simple. If
Or
you
why
print
does it borrow money? There's two things: print, collect taxes, and borrow money. Three things, I guess.
That's what I'm saying. So, like, in any case, the idea is if you can print your own money, why do you go to other people for the money, right? Whether you go to other people and take taxes from them, or you go to other people and ask them to buy your bonds. But basically, the idea is like, if you can print, why do you go to other people? Very simple. So, if you print money, the everybody gets hit equally, right? More or less.
Yep.
Just walk with me here. But you can tax only the rich people, right? So by having a tax that's a percentage of your income, it
Yeah.
allows you, right, to take more from the rich and give to the poor. So like taxing redistributes wealth versus like printing money, you could say that it actually transfers money from the poor to the rich because like it creates inflation and then poor people spend more of their value on consumption, right? They don't save as much. So like inflation hits the poor and gives the money to the rich. Taxation takes money from the rich and gives it to the poor. And so that's why they need both. They need to balance these two forces. Now, of course, this dude doesn't want to say it. Borrowing money, it's all about the US citizens versus external citizens, right? Who buys the bonds? Is it all US people that buy the bonds? Is it poor people that buy the bonds or rich people that buy the bonds, right? So those are the questions he didn't want to answer. I don't think he's stupid. Of course he knows the answer.
I don't think so. He was stumbling around about
No,
like
he was stumbling because he knows that this is not politically correct. What I just said is not politically correct. You can't say it in public. So that's why he was stumbling.
I don't know. I think you might be giving him a lot of credit, but maybe you're right. Maybe you're
I
right.
mean, I literally think it's either that or this guy is a complete moron. And he's like the chair of, what was it? The National Economic Council or whatever?
Yeah.
Like, I don't believe that he's a moron. I just think the answer is really politically incorrect. But what I actually thought that you would send, there's another clip from this interview that basically he said something like, these things are very complicated. It's not easy to explain. Every time people tell you that stuff is complicated, it's to basically obfuscate the very simple answer to something. You know what I mean? Even with my daughter, right? When she asks me something that I don't want her to do, I'm like, just trust me, it's complicated. You're gonna get a bad boo-boo if you do this. It's like that's the equivalent, right? They're like, trust us. If we would just print the money instead of taxing and borrowing, you would get a very bad boo-boo economically. So that's why we do it.
I like bad boo-boos. I like bad boo-boos. I don't know. I mean, listen, this whole thing is just it's one. This is a failure of MMT. He mentions MMT a couple times.
It's not a failure. Okay, I just have to say, I listened to Stephanie Kelton. She knows exactly what she's doing. So her point is to say we should print more instead of borrowing. We should print more.
But it's improvement. Look at Japan. Okay, fine. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
So like, why does she want to print more? Because when you borrow, somebody has to buy your debt. So you have a limit to how much you can borrow, but you have no limit to how much you can print. And then the other thing is her magic solution when she was asked, okay, but what if all this money printing creates inflation? Then they're like, oh, it's very simple. We will raise the tax rates and that will remove the money from the economy and reduce inflation. So basically MMT is just another way to more aggressively redistribute money from the rich to the poor. They're not stupid. She knows exactly what she's talking about. And I don't like when people say, oh, Stephanie Kelton is so stupid. No, she knows exactly. If raising taxes is her solution, that's all you need to know. She basically wants to raise taxes and print more money. And she was the economic advisor of Bernie Sanders. And that's exactly what Bernie Sanders wants to do. Print money, give it to the poor people, raise taxes on the rich. They're not stupid, I'm telling you. I don't like the crypto Twitter where it's like, haha, these morons, they don't know how the economy works. Like, do you really think that a professor doesn't know how the economy works? No, she has an agenda. She has a political agenda that she's pushing through her policies.
I'm not saying that she's stupid. I'm just thinking MMT is stupid. If evidenced by Japan out of
It's
anything,
stupid because
doesn't work.
taking money from the rich people who know how to allocate capital and giving it to poor people that just consume it all is a stupid policy, because to your point from the beginning of the podcast, you need capital goods. Like, you need someone to invest in machines, in plants, in equipment, in things that are not consumable goods, and that's what lowers the cost of the goods for the poor people. And the socialists have it ass backwards. They're like, oh, the bosses are exploiting you, so let's take the boss's money and give it to you. But guess what? A poor people doesn't know. A poor person, they just don't know how to allocate. Again, not because of an IQ issue. It's because if you are living paycheck to paycheck all your life, you don't have the incentive to educate yourself. What is an investment? What is an index fund? How do I, what's compound interest? It's just not relevant to you because you don't have money left at the end of the month. So it's like, it's been tried so many times and it's failed every single time. Yeah, Japan. Now I heard a podcast that China is exactly going to become Japan. 300% debt to GDP. That's where they're headed because they don't have enough kids. The older people are hogging all the managerial positions. And just think about it. Like, the society that doesn't have enough kids, there's so many problems. Like, how can a young guy get an entry-level job when, like, everybody in the company has 10 years of experience? It's just like screws the whole kind of society. But yeah, that's where China is headed. And I really hope that, thank God that in the US, it's like, first of all, it's a democracy. Also, we have like the Senate, which thank God, it's basically what makes the US not a purely representative democracy. And yeah, let's hope that I'm very optimistic. Look, I don't know. I was hoping to chat on this episode about tech and MicroStrategy and robots and stuff like that. We'll get to it in the next episode. But my point is, there's forces of good, there's forces of evil. I see all these like crazy redistribution, crazy campus protests of the forces of evil, whether they know it or not, right? You can be part of a force of evil without being evil yourself, just like join the protest because you want to get laid. And
I'm trying to protest because you want to get
do you
laid.
see their list of demands? They're like, we need like lube, we need like morning after pills. Like, seriously.
No, wait,
Yeah,
what?
yeah. They have these lists of like, if you want to help us with humanitarian aid. So they have like the vegan stuff. They're like, don't bring bagels, right? Anti-Semitism.
Yeah, why? Oh my God! Oh,
No,
is this why no bagels? Oh my
literally, it
God!
says like, don't bring bagels. Or either that or gluten. I don't know. But my point is,
Why no sunscreen? By the way, do you know?
what?
They also say no sunscreen in capital letters. Like, I don't know why no sunscreen. It's a Jewish invention.
I
The
don't
Jews
know.
are seeping
Like,
into my.
the
Wait, tell me about the
point is-
lube and then the morning.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, guys, you do you, even though you're supporting an evil ideology. And look, my grandparents were hardcore communists, and they weren't bad people. They just supported a very bad ideology. Like, I think I've said this on the pod before. I read my grandpa's diaries. He was like high up in the government of Bulgaria, and he really thought he's making the world a better place. He really thought that the evil Germans and French and UK factory bosses are exploiting their like employees, and we're building a communist like paradise here where people get like 40 days of vacation per year. I would love to have 40 days of vacation per year.
Me too.
But like, it's just like, how can you compete on the global stage if your employees take 40 days of vacation and then in the US they take 2 weeks off for the same salary? Like, it just doesn't work.
Well, listen, on this note, we should wrap up. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk about MicroStrategy, but there's a lot. We haven't talked for a while, so there's a lot to catch up on. But next time, we'd love to talk about MicroStrategy. And
Next time I get the first items of the agenda.
Yes. You get all of them. It's your agenda. It's your agenda, sir.
But Alex, I have to make sure that the agenda is buttoned up before our podcast, okay? I can't have like a agenda that's like just not
buttoned up all the way to the
maybe
top.
we should have a call before the podcast to make sure that the agenda is okay.
If we do that, we should definitely have a call to plan for the call before the podcast, and then do the podcast. If we don't plan to plan, then we haven't planned at all.
And on that note, We wish all of our viewers, listeners, a great weekend.
Have a good weekend, Shimon.
Bye.